Hi guys, welcome to another video, and in this video we're going to be going over this image, how it was shot, how it was edited in Lightroom, and how we came to this result. What we'll do is take a look at that now, and we'll also have a look at the equipment that was used to light it as well. Okay, so back into Lightroom, we'll hit grid. That's the final image. I've got a behind the scenes grab shot here, another one there that's untouched, unedited. That's the original raw file there. After Lightroom editing, that's a PSD with some retouching done, and then that is a virtual copy of the original raw file, which is reset basically, and that's the one that we're going to be working on now. What I've done in Lightroom is I've increased the font size to 150%, so it's a little easier for you to see the sliders, hopefully, when you're on a mobile device or tablet, so let me know if that works. And I think that's about it. Right, so let's take a look at this. Now, we'll go over the lighting setup first, before we have a look at anything else. Equipment-wise, that was used, if we switch to the browser, we used a Pica 200 with the bare bulb fitment. In any kind of modifier, softbox, beauty dish, strip box of the like, I will always go bare bulb because you get a far better quality of light. It fills the modifier much better, and you get less of a hot spot versus using the Fresnel head like you would get on a traditional speed light. So we had a Pica 200 down there, and we also had it on the Pixapro dual bracket, which allows you to fit one bulb in the center or have two bulbs fitted and two heads for 400 watt seconds versus 200, and it gives you a modeling light as well, which can help you focus and see what you're doing, especially on location. Now, modifier wise, or the main modifier was not this bag. There it is. Right, it was the 60 centimeter collapsible portable beauty dish with the white interior, and it folds up to a nice little small package and goes in the bag. And we shot this with the inner deflector plate fitted, and also the outer diffuser plate and inner baffle as well. Now, the reason for that was to reduce the hot spot. It's still quite a specular source, and what you'll see, because it was positioned directly overhead or in paramount butterfly lighting position, you will still see some highlights on the forehead, bridge of the nose, possibly the tops of the cheeks, so some people as well. As a result, if you don't have that installed and the diffusion material, you get a very distinct hot spot, very specular kind of result with it. So you get bright highlights rather than them being still bright but spread a little bit, and we'll take a look at that in a moment. Now, this does come with a grid, which we can see here. Didn't bother using the grid because if the grid was used, it actually would not do anything with the reflector that we had set up. So this modifier that we used, the 60 centimeter white collapsible, isn't mine. It belongs to a good friend of mine, Mark, and we used that just to see what it does and see what it could do. I've not bothered getting one myself because I've already got a beauty dish, so I don't need one. And now the lighting setup, we see the collapsible beauty dish up above. We have two negative fill strip cards here, made DIY from some foam core in Hobbycraft down there, just to edge out the jawline, so to increase contrast and shadowing on the side of the face. And how much it will do on each side depends on where they're stood. I mean, he's closer to this one at the moment where he's stood versus this one. And we also had here a flag, which is a 5-in-1 flag with a reflector silver panel on to kick some light back in. If the grid was fitted to this, this would not see any light, and therefore we get no bounce or fill. Now, the background here looks quite warm in tone, and the skin tone's warmed up a little bit on this one because I've dragged the shutter. So here, ISO 100, 2.8 at a 30th of a second, whereas I am normally shooting at 160th. So I've dragged the shutter to bring in some ambient light, just so we can see what's going on here with the setup. So that's the lighting setup. We can see the black boards are there. This is an untouched file, and you can change the contrast by pushing those in closer or further away. Obviously you get to a certain point and they're in your shot at that point, but they just edge out the jawline here. I've lifted them up to this level so they don't influence the shirt too much, or the collar a little bit down there, or we don't start to have too wider black panels so they start to darken the already dark top that's there. Right, so let's see how we got to this final look here. Now in Lightroom, here we go. Boom. The file comes in and it has these default settings applied. Adobe Standard for the color profile, -4 point saturation vibrance, noise reduction all taken off. I will do that if I need it. And lens correction profiles as well. This was shot on the Canon 5DSR with the 8514L, 2.8, 160th, 100 ISO even. God, if I could talk. Right, let's get rid of that. So that is the default import. Now I tend to start on medium contrast by default because that's just too flat. Not interested in that, so start on medium and go from there. I also tend not to use Adobe Color because it just does funky things with skin tones in my opinion, and it crushes the blacks on the newer Canon cameras. They've basically, as far as I'm concerned, Adobe have ruined the profile, but there we go. So what we'll do here, I will warm this up a touch, but not that much. Let's go 5450. A little bit there, and go -1 just to take a little bit of magenta out of it. Canon files, although a little less so than the newer cameras, on the newer cameras should I say, tend to shift to magenta a little bit. Nikon you'll see greens more so. We'll take a little bit on the global exposure, down there. I won't do a global change just yet on contrast, we'll come back to that. We'll go down to the tone curve first. Now, generally what I'll also do is make sure that it's sharp, which it is. If you miss focus on this camera, you will know about it. But we can count the eyelashes. Look at that. Okay, there we go. White balance wise, I will tend to eyeball it if I'm not using a color checker passport. I'm working on a calibrated screen. No idea what you guys are going to see after YouTube compression, but there we go. Colours looking good. That's fine there. If I did take the white balance picker and go, where are we? Here, it's going to go too warm, 6200 Kelvin. In my opinion, it's too warm, so I tend not to bother doing that. White balancing off there just goes horrible and green, so nothing's going to work here. So we will go to 5450 and -1 there, and that's looking fine. Bear in mind we've not done anything on the contrast or anything yet, so we're working on the shadows first. I have my range mask selected here by pressing J, so it tells me when something's being crushed to black. Like, I don't care about that. I don't care about inside the hair. Not really worried about that. And if we were to push the highlights up, we would see that warning come on the highlights as well. There, so you can see highlight warnings. Boop. Or not. Right. Let's take that back down. So we'll drag the shadows down a touch, push the midtones just a little bit. So I tend to do most of the contrast work initially on the tone curve for a bit more control. You can also take the sliders here, drag those down, and it's just to reduce the hot spots there. Now, when I say that, it's not to say that they are a negative thing. I expect with this kind of modifier, and even with a beauty dish, to see highlights on the bridge of the nose, the tip of the nose, and on the forehead. Now it will depend on the shape of the face. If the forehead recedes back at an angle, you'll see a hot spot, most definitely. if they have very defined cheekbones, you might see highlights here. You're always going to get it on the bridge of the nose, tip of the nose, when the light is up above, tilted down. Remember, if we go back to this shot, what we can see here. Right, let's go back to that. Ooh, back to develop. And we shall drag the blacks down a little bit down on the whites. And now we'll go into global contrast. In addition to what we did before, I don't want to drag it down too far because then it starts to block up. Now, we're only clipping the shadows in the hair here and just on the tie, but look how dark this part is here. And if you put this on Facebook, it'd just look awful because it crushes the blacks. I'm not editing for Facebook, but it's just too contrasty doing that. So drag it down some. Here, take the highlights down. We'll go into the luminance and the HSL section. I can obviously brighten and darken the skin just a little bit here. Whenever you're making a change to a color luminance, it will affect the saturation of the color. Exposure also affects the saturation of a color as well. Not too much there. Now, if we punch into the eyes, we should see some change on the whites of the eyes and the inner section of the eyes if you push the aqua up or the blue. Nothing too crazy. I'll lift those a little bit. I tend not to bother doing too much with the eyes. I certainly won't go in here with a brush and go, where are we? Iris enhance and start faffing around doing that or making them glow like a glow old, because that sucks. So if you get the eyes lit well, you're good to go. You shouldn't really have to be doing anything on the eyes, in my opinion. Let's see, so if we go back to where we were, which was apparently a grey screen. No, there we go. After, so before, after, so before and after. Let's see, boom, a little bit more contrast in the after, and let's go. Let's take a little bit of the exposure reduction off. Right, that's fine. And I will drag the shadows. If you press and hold the Alt key, you'll bring in a mask which will show you what's starting to clip a little bit on the shadows. That's fine. Again, I'm not bothered about this here, because if we take that off, it's fine. This isn't about the hair, so I'm not looking at that. That's absolutely fine. Right, let's see what else we will do here. We'll probably go just a couple of points more on the contrast. We'll do a little bit of texture. Oh look, he's been frequency separation. Boom. Ooh, okay, that didn't work. In 2 slides. That just looks terrible, doesn't it? All right, let's undo that. Right, so now with shooting a male, I don't mind pumping in a little bit more texture or clarity. It's very, very subtle, really, what we end up doing. Obviously, I don't want to go too far, so I did. We'll leave it there. Right. Oh, so we'll just pump in just a little bit on the dehaze, and we can actually see what that's done. How do you actually... Oh, it's because they've moved it. See, all the presents used to be down near the sharpening, and they've gone and changed it. Never mind. So before and after. So before, again, it's flatter as a raw file, even though I've got it on the medium contrast curve. And after, a little bit more bite to it. Again, the specularity here, I totally expect that. If we had a silver beauty dish, so if we had, oh, let's go back that way. That version with the silver interior, a couple of things will happen. Okay, not the Elegant fit, but that doesn't matter. Silver is more specular. You get a little bit more output from your light because it's more efficient, but you will have a hotter highlight or specular highlight, which you would see here and here. What diffusion does, using that diffusion material that we saw fitted to the inside, the baffle, and on the front and the deflector plates, is it just smooths out that highlight a little bit, so this isn't too blocked up and too specular. There, it just spreads it out a little bit and diffuses it that way. People always get it mixed up. They say, well, put some diffusion on and make your light source softer. It's only going to do that if it makes the light source larger relative to your subject, but what it will do is it will change contrast. So if it's not making it bigger, it will change contrast and reduce contrast a bit and just spread the highlights out. People often get that mixed up. And we're pretty much there. We'll do a little bit of sharpening. I mean, does it really need it? Probably not, but we'll do it anyway. Right. So we'll grab Alt for the sharpening mask, and it goes to grayscale there. So now I don't want to globally sharpen the image. There's not much point in sharpening the paper. So we'll change this down to the key areas. A little bit of detail, put that up there. A little bit of sharpening there. Now what I would normally do is I would go into Photoshop and do some local sharpening, lips and mouth, and on the eyes. Unsharp mask potentially as well, although with the 5DSR you tend not to need it that much, before coming into Lightroom for a more subtle final sharpen doing this. Nothing wrong with the sharpening in Lightroom, just doing that of course, but it's not the whole process I would normally do. I'm not going to go into Photoshop and retouch this now. This is just a Lightroom edit, but that is plenty sharp enough. Now if we go back to the grid and then go back to that and hit compare, we have that's the edit we've just done, and that was my original edit a month or two ago, I think, give or take. Fairly similar. That's a little warmer. I think what I've probably done there is either a slightly different white balance setting, or I may have used the split tone. So if we go back to grid, let's see what we've done. Develop. Oh, I am not going to see it on that file. Grid. Let's go back to the original raw. Develop. Just to see. Yeah, so the highlights are just pushed in a little bit warmer in the split toning, using the yellow section just to slightly warm the skin tones up. I can give or take that really. I mean, it's easy enough to do on this one here. So develop. We don't want to obviously do that because now they've got jaundice. So we'll take that down to about there, and it just warms it up. So fairly similar really. Surprising, I've not gone massively different direction wise. It's maybe just a fraction more contrast, but again, if we compare the two, Shift or Control and select and then press C to compare them, those are the two images there. Fairly similar. So that is that. Now obviously talking through this takes a little bit longer going through it, go back into develop, than it would just quickly running through. But personally I tend to not do a whole lot to the images. It's basic color toning and contrast, unless a client requests a certain look, in which case more will be done. I'll go round trip into Photoshop and get rid of a few blemishes, so I just retouch a few little elements out here and what have you, any blemishes, which everybody has them and everybody's fine as they are. You don't need filters, you don't need to go nuts frequency separating people. Anyway, let's not get on that apple box and start ranting. But that's it. I'm going to do a couple of these whilst I've got some downtime with this whole craziness that's happening in the world at the moment. Any feedback or any questions, let me know in the comments below. Anything you'd like to see done differently with these. If you'd like to see the whole round trip edit into Photoshop, that's going to be a longer video, and people will probably rip my Photoshop techniques to shreds. But if you want to see it, let me know. And I will catch you guys in the next video. Oh, that's his eyebrow. There's his eye. Oh, come on. Lightroom. Capture one's better. Come on, hurry up. Oh, there we go. Right. I will see you in the next video.